So this is the video that you had been asking me to make, and I didn't want to do it. But then, I did it, and it got 1 million views, which means I should listen to you more often. It's so hot, that mask was so hot. And since that video came out, I've been tagged in literally thousands of Instagram stories, YouTube videos, being like, Jesse, I was trying this, what do you think? I'm so happy you're doing it. That's amazing. Keep. But I mean, let's be honest, we all have room to grow, myself included. Hopefully this video is better than the last one. I shouldn't say that in case it isn't. And so here is my in-camera transitions, how to finesse it in the edit video, circa late 2019 by JesseDriftwood. Down there. Hello. What's into the coffee? Now where do I put it? If you haven't already seen the video that I made last year, my in-camera transitions masterclass, I suggest watching that because I really cover the basics in that video, what a transition is, why you should use it, and how I don't really actually think they're all that important, but I believe it as much today as I did then. They're a lot of fun, and it's a cool technique to try and flex your creative muscles on how you could make the transition more interesting or how you could surprise people, just how to improve the transitions overall, and the skills that you learn while doing that translate in all other aspects of editing and in shooting, because the more you shoot, the more you grow. The more you grow, the more you know. But if you don't have like 17 or 16 whatever minutes to watch that last video, here is a very brief rundown of what a transition is and then what an in-camera transition is. In an editor, most typically a transition is an effect applied between two clips, and that could be a cross dissolve or a star wipe or all those kind of cheesy generic things we grew up watching. But something that has gained a lot of popularity in recent years is in-camera transitions. So rather than using software to wipe from one shot to another, we're physically moving the camera to simulate those movements and thus tying our shots together. I don't want to spend too much time on what a transition is because I did that already. What I really want to do in this video is share a few more tips and tricks to look out for while you're shooting these, and then a bunch of little things that you can do in the edit that's just going to make these transitions delicious.
Often the temptation with these types of transitions is to use them for every single shot. But I actually think one of the most powerful ways to use them is taking you from one scene to an entirely new scene. Not just shot to shot, but from inside the studio all the way to outside. And realistically, that's when you're gonna see transitions most commonly used in movies, not just shot to shot to shot, all willy-nilly, but taking you from a scene in LA that's finished, and meanwhile in New York City, the camera flies out the window and now we're in New York. But there is another way that you're frequently gonna see these transitions used in movies, and that's like this. Rather than moving the camera yourself in order to create motion blur and hide a cut, actually taking things in the natural world, things like traffic driving by, in order to hide your cuts and move to tighter angles. If you want to see a more in-depth look in what we're doing while shooting this and how we're moving the camera, last year's transition video goes into a lot more detail, so watch that video.
Now, in last year's video, I had a handful of comments of people mentioning ND filters and how using them will help you get the proper shutter speed and get more motion blur and thus making the effect work. And you are right, but also you're not entirely right.
See, I'm shooting all of this on my iPhone. Well, not all of it, just that last shot. And my iPhone does not have ND filters. So why does that effect still work? And the answer is pretty simple. It's not the motion blur that's hiding the cut, but rather the mind's subconscious anticipation. Our brains process that when some things exit frame to the left, new things are gonna enter frame from the right. And so because we know that it's the direction that sells it and not the motion blur, there's a lot we can do in post in order to make this effect work more effectively. So let's go back to the computer, because I am very cold.
Hello from the computer with our friends. Now I know this may come across as a bit bizarre, being like, hey, why are you doing in-camera transitions if there's all this like editing tweaking you need to do? Why don't I just buy a preset? And the easy answer for that is, well, a preset doesn't give you control. It also doesn't really teach you anything about editing videos in the future. So by going through this process and learning these little tips and techniques for finessing these edits, it teaches us more than just how to make transitions. It teaches us how to fix all sorts of problems that you may run into while editing. I learned almost all of this in my 2 years of making daily Instagram stories, because I treated every Instagram story as an opportunity to learn at least one new thing. I learned how to change the color of my eyes for a tiny effect where I'm losing my mind, all sorts of video. I want to break down 3 things for you right now. Obviously, we're going to break down how I shot and edited that entire intro sequence. I'm also going to show you how I shot and edited a few other things throughout this video, even stuff at this desk. But before we get to that, I'm going to show you the fundamentals of these editing techniques using footage that I did not shoot, footage that comes from our sponsor. That sponsor, of course, because of course, is Storyblocks. Hopefully by now you know that Storyblocks is a fantastic online subscription platform where you can get access to thousands, and by thousands I think it's actually 300,000+ royalty-free, high-quality HD 4K stock footage clips that you can use basically anywhere you want to, in as many of them as you would like to use. Beyond just stock footage, they also have things like After Effects templates and textures, backgrounds, all sorts of video editing elements. Sound effects, that's another thing. So I've pulled up their website and I downloaded a whole bunch of snowy scenes because winter has begun, and truthfully, I like winter. And I also have to keep telling myself I like winter, otherwise I will hate winter. Brought them here into Final Cut, and I'm diving straight into the edit. And I will tell you, this edit only took about 20 minutes. In this little section, I'm gonna show you 3 of the main techniques that I use to finesse these transitions. There's gonna be more than that, but there's 3 primary ones. And that is speed ramping, keyframing the position, and also keyframing our color grades. There's definitely more than that in here, but those are 3 of the ones that I use just all the time. Now, I found this drone shot descending from the clouds or the mist or something into these trees. However, I wanted to open with that shot and use the fogginess as my transition. So I have reversed this clip so that now we go from the trees up into the clouds. You'll be surprised at how often I do things like reversed clips. When you are reversing clips, obviously be careful that you don't have a waterfall going upwards or, things that defy gravity, unless you're okay with that, and then whatever, just reverse it. Now, because that fog doesn't completely obscure the frame, I've added a keyframe right here for my color grade, and then right at the end, I'm gonna add one more keyframe where I basically lift the shadows, lift the mids, so that everything washes out into this completely white frame, and it looks natural because it looks just like more fog has descended. Following this, I've got this shot of this cheerful young lad who's throwing some snow at the camera. What a guy. And I've added that cut point from right after the snow hits the lens. So what we're seeing now is a completely whited out lens from the snow, and as the snow disappears, we see his face again. In order to accentuate that, I've done the same thing with the color grade, but in reverse. So I've started with a keyframe where I've lifted the shadows, lifted the mids, so it's almost completely washed out, and within the first 6 or 8 frames, that's brought us back to the regular contrast of the shot. Our next shot here is just a hard cut because you don't want every shot to be a transition. Even in a video where I'm trying to teach you transitions, I can't just do it every time. It's exhausting. I have this shot of a couple, I assume, throwing some snow into the air, and in this shot you notice that the camera is slowly kind of orbiting around them a little bit, and what that gives us is a little bit of parallaxing motion in the background. So in order to accentuate that, I've done what I often do, which is add speed ramps to the beginning and end, but I've also cropped it in by about 28% or so that I can add a keyframe at the beginning, shimmy it all the way one way, a few frames later add another keyframe, shimmy it over, and same thing on the end. So we're just accentuating that movement on both sides of it. A similar thing is taking place here with this girl taking selfies, which is that I've speed ramped this slowly orbiting shot around her, and I'm having those speed ramps land on moments that feel good and happy and make me like winter. Now on top of this clip, I've also added an adjustment layer, which is slowly zooming the shot in, which gives us even more room to play around with at the end with keyframing her position in order to have her slide a little bit more in the frame. This next shot here is panning, and it's not panning the direction that I wanted it to, and so that gives me two options. I can reverse the shot, but sometimes water reverse looks a little bit ridiculous. So in this case, what I did is I actually pulled up an effect called flipped, where I'm basically mirroring the shot so that now left becomes right and right becomes left, and it makes that speed ramped whipping transition in the right direction. I have done this more times than I'd like to admit in all sorts of videos that I've made. And similar to the reversing thing, the main thing you're gonna have to be careful of is there's not text or writing in the background that will be obviously backwards. I definitely have one Instagram story from an airport where you can see all the signs in the background are backwards, but I didn't care. It was an Instagram story. And then I've added this shot of traffic going by. I noticed there's one big truck that I could use to obscure the frame. It's not quite big enough, so I've zoomed the whole shot in here and I've lined it up so that that truck wipes across the frame. Now, rather than doing any masking or anything like that, I've actually just added a really small crossfade here. That's another thing that I think you'd be surprised at just how often I use, about a 2 or 3 frame cross dissolve in my whip transitions. It doesn't always work, but sometimes it can just polish things up a little bit. Another hard cut here to another girl throwing snow at the camera. Apparently that is a theme of wintry footage. And I've used this moment where that snowball completely wipes the frame. Now what's cool about this one is that you'll actually notice the snowball here is entering the frame from the top. So keeping this direction in mind, the brain is assuming the first part of the snowball to clear the frame is also gonna come from the top. It's gonna pass through the frame this way. So I found another shot that's moving upwards and looking down over a ledge into a snowy cityscape. A little bit of keyframed color grade so that it's a bit more believable. A little bit of a cross dissolve here. Add a little bit of sound design to all this. Add a little bit of a color grade. And this is what you're left with. Brag or anything, but it actually kind of surprised me how much I like this and how it made me excited for winter. I love a good snowfall. So if you are interested in learning more about Storyblocks, there's a link down in the description. Go click that, check it out. I dare you to count how many different shots of people throwing snowballs at lenses they have. And now that we have all these little editing techniques in mind, the speed ramping, the reversing, the flipping, the color grade keyframes, the positions, the cross dissolves. Let's go have a look at that introduction and other parts throughout this video on just how it was put together. Here we go. I knew that for this year's transition videos, I wanted to make it a bit of a callback to last year's video. I wanted to keep a similar format, have similar shots, but I kind of wanted to up the ante a little bit. So last year I opened a video with a similar shot of this cathedral-y church off in the distance and me walking back and zooming back. This year I decided to shoot it from 200 millimeters and walk back way further, all the way to about 15 millimeters. I do not have a 15 to 200 millimeter lens. So what I've done here is I started at the window at about 200 and slowly walked back, keeping that church as centered as possible until I hit 70 millimeters. From there, I switched lenses to the 15 to 35, but in order to bridge that gap a bit more, I actually switched it into 4K so that 35 becomes more like 65 or so. And then from there, I walked back, zooming the lens all the way out again. Then I switched the lens into 1080p so that I'm at 35 millimeters and walking back until I hit 15 millimeters and thus revealing that entire storage unit that I had climbed in last year's video. In post, I added these 3 shots side by side, stabilized them as best as I could and lined them up as close as possible. And then I actually exported that part of the video, re-imported it, and then I re-stabilized it in order to marry it as one big zooming, walking out shot. However, if you've ever had a shot with whip transitions that you tried to stabilize, you'll know it often doesn't work out very well. So what I've done here is that I've actually cut the clip right before that whip transition happens and stabilized just the consistent part of the footage. Once that's stable, I'll take that whipping part and overlay the first frame of that to the last frame of the steady part drop the opacity a lot, and then scale and distort that clip until it lines up perfectly over top, and that should make it feel like one nice big stable shot that ends with a cool whipping transition. The next shot is a whip and push in towards me, walking into the door here, where you see me wearing this creepy mask that apparently I found on a building. I didn't. I ordered it on the internet. It's terrible. I bought 2 of them. And because I wanted to accentuate and bring more attention to the mask, we shot this shot once more, just static, real close in on this disgustingly creepy, uncomfortable, terribly made mask. And it's just an action match here. Wow, that is surprising. And the camera is just panning and following the bag as I throw it in the air. As with most things I shoot, this was shot at 60 frames a second, so I've speed ramped that down to 40% of the speed, and then I've added an adjustment layer, which is just zooming in on that backpack and rotating to just bring more attention to it. I do the same thing on the next shot of the bag here, keeping the same direction of rotation, but it's slowly zooming out as the bag is about to hit the camera. While filming this, I was reminded actually of some Instagram stories I had made years ago where the camera hit me in the chest, and I think a transition you're used to seeing is someone being like, bam, they hit the camera, or bam, the camera hits something, and then we bounce off of it. But because I'm such a believer in following the motion, I think it's a more effective transition to have a camera angle that pushes through the bag rather than bounces off of it in reverse. So Brandon and I grabbed this IKEA shelfy table thing and put it up on top of this other IKEA table-y thing. And then I have Brandon pushing through one of the squares towards me, removing my mask. In post, all I've done is I've masked out the edges of that square so that you don't see anything around it, and I have keyframed it so that it's slowly moving in with the bag. When you look at it here, I could do a much better job than that. It would have been wise to make it look like it's coming out of the zipper the whole time, but when you're playing it back in real time and when you see it for the first time and you're not expecting it, I think the effect works great. Finally, Brandon is following the motion of me removing that hat, and as I throw it to the ground, he also pans the camera down, which is getting wiped out by the bottom of the box. Now we're on the lookout for what's that next shot that's going to continue the motion. So I decided a bit of a POV angle of me throwing the hat down would be cool to just finally solidify this disgusting, creepy mask. Now, while doing that, the main thing I'm making sure of is that while I pull the mask away from the camera, that light is coming in from the bottom before it's coming in from the top. And the reason I'm doing that is to follow that same motion. At the end here, I just whip the camera up, which is a hard cut to Brandon's whipping the camera up on a tripod so that he can whip up and push in nice and smoothly without having any weird parallax issues. And then here we are, up on top of the shelf. I think it turned out to be a really cool sequence and one that I'm pretty happy with. But that is not all. There are more transitions in this video that I wanted to break down for you. So at the end of my little talking segment up here, I just say like, hey, to down there. I quite literally just grab the camera on a tripod and tilt it forward so it has this tilting down and panning right motion. I knew I needed to follow that in my next shot going to the computer. However, when I was filming that, there was no one around to help me do that. So this is another technique I learned while making Instagram stories for myself, which is how do you have a transition of yourself when no one's there to shoot it? So I busted out my tripod, figured out what shot I was gonna have. Then I filmed the camera movement transition without me, and I just lock off the camera where my talking head sequence is going to be. After that, in post, I just mask out my body, move it over to the section of the camera movement, and keyframe it so I line up where I would have been in that chair had someone else filmed it. Add a little directional blur on top of this so that it matches the surroundings, and then you've got yourself a pretty believable whip transition with you in the frame, even though you shot it. I have done this a few times in my life. Not a lot, but a handful of times. Twice in this video. It might seem overly complicated, but the more you practice these effects, the easier they become, and the easier they become, the faster you do them, and the faster you do them, the quicker you move on to other things. And now all of a sudden you've got a tool belt full of camera movement and editing techniques, and you look like Tim the Toolman Taylor. If there is something you learned in this video, let me know down in the comments. That means a lot to me. If there's something that I should have covered in the video, also let me know in the comments. Just don't be rude. I hate when you are rude.